Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into a book that really shifted how we think about modern society. It's Herbert Marcuse's One-Dimensional Man. Came out in the 1960s, sent huge ripples through critical thought, and honestly, it feels incredibly relevant today.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a profound critical diagnosis of its time. Marcuse wrote it when he saw what he called this stifling conformity.
Right.
But, even within that pretty stark analysis, he doesn't entirely give up hope for human freedom.
And his background is key here, isn't it? The Frankfurt School.
Exactly. He was a major figure there, that group that basically revolutionized critical theory. And he'd already made waves with Eros and Civilization.
Right, his earlier work.
Yeah. So One-Dimensional Man really brings together his unique perspective.
That context is so important. So our mission here is to unpack Marcuse's, powerful critique of modern Western societies. And he looks at communist systems too, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. He sees parallels in the forms of control.
So we'll explore his ideas on how these new, often really subtle, forms of domination and social control shape our lives, our thoughts, even how we understand freedom itself. Okay, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So that title, One-Dimensional Man. It sounds pretty definitive, almost absolute. What exactly does Marcuse mean by one-dimensional? Are we talking about everyone being like robots?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it gets right to the nuance. He actually uses one-dimensional as an adjective, you see, not some totalizing label. He's describing deficient conditions, a state where possibilities, alternatives, they start closing off. It began as an epistemological concept, basically about how we know things, how we structure thought. But he expands it, showing how this way of thinking isn't just in our heads, it gets embedded in our social structures, how we relate to each other, this flattening, flattening of critical thought and action.
Okay, a flattening. So if one-dimensionality is about closing off possibilities, how does Marcuse say advanced industrial society actually does that? How does it contain social change so effectively? What are the mechanisms?
Well, he calls it a singular achievement of this society. It appears capable of containing social change, preventing really fundamental shifts in institutions or, human existence itself.
It doesn't just fight change, it absorbs it.
Exactly, it absorbs it. He talks about the integration of opposites. Think about the general acceptance of the national purpose, or how bipartisan policy makes the main political parties seem almost the same on big issues.
Right.
And a key example for him is the collusion of business and labor within the strong state. The system basically neutralizes conflict by bringing old enemies onto the same team, working towards the same goals.
That blurring of lines is fascinating. Where former antagonists end up cooperating. He mentions how class antagonism seemed to fade because everyone gets invested in just keeping the system going, right?
Yeah. Precisely. An overriding interest in the preservation and improvement of the institutional status quo unites the former antagonists. He gives these striking examples like business and organized labor lobbying together for things like bigger missile contracts.
Seriously?
Yeah. And he quotes this union leader who basically said, all the things we fought for, the corporation is now giving the workers.
Wow.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? If the system provides so much, how does it maintain control without, obvious force?
And that leads straight to this paradox Marcuse points out. Even if the system delivers the goods, makes life comfortable, and gets most people to accept it. He argues that acceptance does not render it less irrational and less reprehensible. The society manages to suppress the need for change by delivering those goods. We get comfortable, so we stop questioning the underlying irrationality.
Yeah.
It's super subtle control.
And connecting that to the bigger picture, it explains what he calls the closing of the political universe. This advanced industrial society, it combines the welfare state and the warfare state.
Right, the safety net, but also the military machine.
Into this new society with total mobilization. Depressions get controlled, conflicts stabilized, he says, partly because of growing productivity, but also because of the threat of nuclear war. That constant threat keeps things unified.
And it's not just the West. He sees similar things elsewhere.
Yeah. He points to the Soviet system, too, increasingly relying on technological controls as instruments of domination. Even powerful communist parties in France and Italy, they become sort of tame. Legal opposition parties condemned to be non-radical, they play by the rules.
You lose their edge.
They do. And this mechanization, it filters down to work itself, creating a kind of masterly enslavement, he calls it.
Masterly enslavement.
Masterly enslavement.
Automation changes work. It leads to this drugging rhythm where things swing rather than oppress. The worker loses their professional autonomy, gets incorporated into the technological community. Even if work seems less physically hard, its very nature becomes a tool for integration, for control. The chains are invisible, almost comfortable. This idea of subtle, almost invisible control is really key. How does he describe domination being transfigured into administration?
He argues the tangible source of exploitation disappears behind the facade of objective rationality. So this unfreedom being subject to the whole productive system, it continues, but it's masked by all these apparent liberties and comforts.
It hides in plain sight, basically.
Very much so. It's clever, almost seamless control, where power hides behind efficiency and progress.
And that connects to the military-industrial complex, which he calls a vicious circle. The military needs corporations for weapons, but also relies on them for knowing what kind of weapons are needed. It just feeds itself.
It does. It keeps the whole system humming along, even if it's built on, potential destruction in this constant state of alert.
What's really chilling is his point about the enemy.
Ah, yes.
It becomes the common denominator for everything. Not necessarily real communism or capitalism, but the idea of liberation itself, the possibility of real change. That's the real specter.
And he lays out this terrifyingly rational calculus, where the annihilation of 5 million people is preferable to that of 10 million, 20 million, and so on.
Just cold calculation.
Cold calculation. And his conclusion from this, democracy would appear to be the most efficient system of domination because it gets our consent for these things.
Okay, so our political options narrow, the system absorbs dissent, but what about culture? Language, our inner lives. Does this one-dimensionality creep in there too?
Oh, absolutely. He argues it subtly conquers culture and language through something he calls repressive desublimation.
Okay, repressive desublimation. Break that down.
Right. It sounds dense, but think of it like this. Technological rationality, the logic of the system, it liquidates the oppositional and transcending elements in the higher culture, but not by banning them.
How?
By incorporating them wholesale into the established order. Instead of just squashing desires or critical ideas, society lets them out, but only in ways that end up reinforcing the system.
So hang on. Even things that seem like rebellion or critique get co-opted, packaged, sold back to us, turned into consumer goods. Resistance becomes a lifestyle brand.
That's a great way to put it. Marcuse says it so sharply. The music of the soul is also the music of salesmanship. Exchange value, not truth value, counts.
Ooh.
Yeah. He's getting at how our deepest expressions, our art, our ideals, they get reduced to what they're worth on the market. And that drains their power to challenge anything.
So even those historically disruptive characters, the artist, the rebel, the outsider, they get transformed.
Essentially transformed, yeah. The vamp, the beatnik, the gangster, they stop being symbols of an alternative. They become just freaks or types of the same life, serving as an affirmation of the way things are.
Part of the spectacle.
Exactly. Art's great refusal, its power to say no, gets invalidated. All these potentially alien and alienating works just become familiar goods and services, part of the background noise.
He even brings in psychiatry, doesn't he?
He does. He makes this cutting point. The psychiatrist takes care of the Don Juans, Romeos, Hamlets, Fausts. He cures them.
Cures them.
Meaning their deep struggles, their angst. It's all reduced to a pathology, something to be fixed so they fit back into the system. And even the rulers of the world are losing their metaphysical features.
Yeah.
Seeing them on TV, it's hardly suitable for drama beyond that of the advertisement. No more mystery, just management.
This feels like a very managed, controlled kind of freedom, and he applies this to sex and relationships too. The de-eroticization of life. What's that about?
Well, when our environment becomes so mechanized, so controlled, there are fewer spaces for what he calls non-repressive sublimation. Think lovemaking in a meadow versus on a Manhattan street. It leads to a localization and contraction of libido.
So even sexual freedom.
It becomes a market value. It gets integrated into the world of commodities. He calls it institutionalized desublimation. It feels like freedom, but it ultimately leads to submission because it operates entirely within the system's terms. It doesn't challenge anything fundamental.
And the mindset this creates is the happy consciousness.
Yes.
which sounds nice, but the way he describes it is actually quite chilling. It's like people become so comfortable, so integrated, that even horror like nuclear war planning becomes just another problem to solve, another game.
Precisely. A consciousness that's lost the ability to feel real critique or deep unease because it's completely saturated with the system's definition of rationality and happiness. It has no limits, he says. It arranges games with death and disfiguration, where fun, teamwork, and strategic importance mix in rewarding social harmony.
Wow. Like those Rand Corporation safe games he mentioned.
Exactly. Where the world becomes a map, missiles merely symbols, and wars just plans and calculations written down on paper. It's this horrifying abstraction that makes the unthinkable seem manageable almost. Normal.
Which perfectly illustrates how language itself gets twisted, right? Leading to the closing of the universe of discourse.
Yes. The gap between how things appear and how they really are just vanishes from language. Magical, authoritarian, and ritual elements permeate speech. Our words get hollowed out.
Creating self-validating hypotheses.
Right. Words like freedom, democracy, peace, they come preloaded with meanings that fit the system. So trying to use them critically, to go beyond that predefined meaning, gets labeled incorrect or propaganda.
Orwellian language.
Exactly what he calls it. Where words mean the opposite or lose their power for critique.
And it gets even weirder, doesn't it? The examples he gives of total commercialization, joining things that should be separate.
Oh yeah, things like labor is seeking missile harmony, or ads for a luxury fallout shelter, complete with carpeting, Scrabble, and TV.
A luxury fallout shelter.
It's absurd, but he says this kind of language promotes the immediate identification of the particular with the general interest. The bizarre becomes normal, even desirable.
And the structure of language changes too. Hyphenated constructions, abbreviations.
Yes, that's fascinating. Language imposes this authoritarian identification of person and function, like Virginia's bird or U.S. Steel's blow. It ties the person directly to their role, their institution. Reducing them. And abbreviations NATO, UN, USSR, AFL-CIO, they cut off transcending connotation. The meaning becomes fixed, doctored, loaded. Complex realities shrink into neat, uncritical labels.
So this functional language, it stops us from seeing the history, the context, the factors behind the facts.
It repels recognition, yeah. It's irreconcilably anti-critical and anti-dialectical. It actively shuts down questioning, looking at things from different angles.
Yeah.
It doesn't just simplify, it actively suppresses deeper understanding.
Which leads to a huge problem. If people speak the language of their masters, benefactors, advertisers, how can they even think critically, let alone speak it?
That's the core difficulty. Marcuse says what they mean cannot be taken at face value, not because they lie, but because the universe is a universe of manipulated contradictions. The tools we use to think our words are compromised.
And this extends even to philosophy, the triumph of positive thinking.
Yes, he sees a big shift away from critical, negative thinking that questions and negates the given reality towards an affirmative, positive thinking that seems highly rational, but ultimately just accepts the status quo.
Philosophy as therapy.
Kind of, yeah. Especially linguistic analysis. It aims to cure thought and speech from confusing metaphysical notions. He points to Wittgenstein's idea that philosophy leaves everything as it is.
So it stops asking the big challenging questions.
It avoids asking and seeking solutions beyond those that are already there. It becomes about clarifying the existing reality, not fundamentally questioning or changing it. It reinforces the boundaries.
He gives that example from industrial sociology. About worker complaints.
Oh, right. That's a perfect illustration of this therapeutic empiricism. A general complaint like wages are too low, which points to a systemic issue, a class issue.
It's turned into.
It gets translated into a specific individual problem, like B's present earnings due to his wife's illness are insufficient to meet his current obligations.
So it becomes a personal problem, not a political one.
Exactly. It strips away the universal class meaning. It becomes a treatable and tractable incident. This reinforces a false consciousness by making systemic problems look like individual misfortunes. It prevents collective action.
And we see this with definitions of democracy, too, focusing on the realistic process of elections rather than actual voter control.
Yes, defining democracy in these limiting but realistic terms like the competitive theory, where we just choose between candidates, rather than the unrealistic idea that the electorate should actually control policy, the mandate theory.
It's circular.
Circular and self-validating, he calls it. It cleverly avoids the decisive question whether the consent itself was not the work of manipulation. It defines democracy democracy only by what we already have, not what it could be or who really pulls the strings.
Okay, so after painting this pretty bleak picture of one-dimensionality taking over everything, politics, culture, language, thought, we get to the slim chance of alternatives.
Right. It's not all doom and gloom, sort of.
He talks about abstract ideas like beauty, justice, happiness, suggesting they reflect this unhappy consciousness of a divided world.
Yeah, and that the real ghost isn't these abstract ideals, but the forcible reality of the whole system dominating individuals. Think of the nation, the corporation, the university, these huge structures that shape our lives. They are very real powers.
This leads him to these contradictory ideas, right? Yeah. Can society contain change, or are there forces that could break it open?
Exactly. It's his central dilemma. He presents both hypotheses. Society seems capable of containing qualitative change, yet maybe forces and tendencies exist which may break this containment. He admits both are true at once, but containment seems dominant.
And if real liberation were possible, he thinks it would need a catastrophic transformation, not just gradual change.
Yes. Not just tweaking the existing system, but a whole new kind of technology and, crucially, a new idea of reason, a fundamental break.
But there's a dark paradox here. We have the tools, engineers of the soul, head shrinkers, but
techniques as a universe of instrumentalities may increase the weakness as well as the power of man. Marcuse argues we're more powerless over his own apparatus than he ever was before. We build these amazing systems and then they end up controlling us.
Like Frankenstein's monster.
In a way, yeah. And he applies this to nature too. Civilization has treated nature as it has treated man, as an instrument of destructive productivity.
So true liberation would mean changing that relationship.
It would involve an aesthetic reduction, a kind of mastery directed toward liberation, reducing the ferocity of man against nature, a gentler, more balanced approach.
Which brings us back to consumerism. He argues that the sheer amount of stuff in overdeveloped countries, goods, services, work, entertainment, that's what keeps the system contained.
Right. The constant flow of goods and distractions effectuates this containment, which leads to a really challenging thought. Maybe real change requires a reduction of overdevelopment.
Going against the grain of more is always better.
Completely.
And in this comfortable, prosperous state, certain human qualities become suspect. Social and unpatriotic.
Yeah, things like refusing toughness and conformity, disobedience to the tyranny of the majority, admitting fear or weakness, having a sensitive conscience that's sickened by what's happening, engaging in feeble and ridiculed actions of protest and refusal.
Basically being human in a way that doesn't fit the mold.
Exactly. Those responses get marginalized because they threaten the smooth functioning of the happy consciousness.
He also mentions the loss of privacy.
Oh yeah. Privacy becomes the most expensive commodity available only to the very rich who don't use it. He finds mass democracy kind of frightening because it involves this push to reject anyone different, the other. We all become this huge captive audience.
So it all circles back to this fundamental problem, this vicious circle. Yeah. How can the administered individuals who have made their mutilation into their own liberties and satisfactions liberate themselves as well as from their masters?
It's the ultimate question of agency, isn't it? If the system shapes our desires, how do we even start wanting something different?
Is there any leverage point?
Well, he speculates about the material base. Maybe the non-functioning of television and the allied media might thus begin to achieve what the inherent contradictions of capitalism did not achieve, the disintegration of the system.
Interesting. So if the distractions stop working,
if those repressive needs, the needs the system creates and satisfies to keep us docile, aren't met, maybe then things could unravel.
Okay, final stretch. Imagination, reality, hope. He sees this obscene merger of aesthetics and reality.
Yeah, where everything blends together, magic and science, life and death, joy and misery. The categories break down.
Like that example of the nuclear plants becoming industrial parks, or the deluxe fallout shelter.
With the wall-to-wall carpeting, television, and Scrabble. Described as a combination family room during peacetime and family fallout shelter should war break out.
It's horrifyingly normal within the system's logic.
That's his point. This horror is taken for granted because it seems perfectly rational in terms of the existing order.
And imagination itself gets twisted, used by the system.
It becomes an instrument of progress, but it's methodically abused, used for turning sense into nonsense and nonsense into sense. Its critical, liberating potential gets blunted.
So the dialectic itself seems hopeless. The conflict between control and freedom just gets managed.
He acknowledges that bleak possibility, The conflict might be manageable and even productive for the system. And he says grimly, with the growth and the technological conquest of nature grows the conquest of man by man. More control over nature means more control over us by the systems we build.
He doesn't leave it there entirely, does he? He insists reification is an illusion.
Right. Despite everything, he points to a potential force for change. The substratum of the outcasts and outsiders, the exploited, the unemployed, those completely outside the system's benefit.
People who have nothing left to lose.
Essentially, their opposition is revolutionary, even if their consciousness is not. By simply refusing to play the game, they violate the rules, and in doing so, reveals it as a rigged game.
Even if they face terrible consequences.
Yes. He says they know that they face dogs, stones, and bombs, jail, concentration camps, even death. Their very existence, their refusal, exposes the lie.
And that refusal, that's the glimmer of hope.
It is. The fact that they start refusing to play the game may be the fact which marks the beginning of the end of a period. And then he quotes Walter Benjamin.
Nur der hoffnungslosen Willen ist uns die Hoffnung gegeben.
It is only for the sake of those without hope that hope is getting to us. A stark, profound thought. Even in the darkest diagnosis, the possibility of rupture, of change remains, perhaps precisely because of those who seem to have no hope left within the system.
That's a heavy but important place to end our deep dive into Herbert Marcuse's one-dimensional man. We've really unpacked his core ideas about how modern society, through this pervasive rationality, subtly controls us, shapes us, makes us comfortable in our unfreedom.
Mm-hmm. His critique really pushes us, doesn't it? To see the irrational in the rational, to question what progress even means when technology and administration become tools for ever more efficient domination. He makes us ask what we're losing, even as we gain comforts.
So the question lingers, really. If genuine liberation seems impossible from within a system that shapes our consciousness, our very desires, what does it truly mean to break free? And who, if anyone, actually has the power to kickstart that catastrophe of liberation he talks about? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on The Deep Dive.